As a kid, I would ask a lot of questions, to the point where my mother would ask me if I was writing a book. And if I kept asking questions, why? Why this? Why that? Why this? Why that? She'd say, it's time to turn and begin a new chapter. I'm not answering any more questions about that particular topic. We might be here tonight wondering why we are celebrating the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica. Like, what is that all about? And why are we celebrating that on a weekend, a Saturday night or a Sunday? Well, it's one of those feasts that if it falls on a Sunday, it's celebrated and it goes above the normal Sunday liturgy. So I'm just going to read to you what the Magnificat says as to why we're doing this. In the year 313, the Roman Emperor Constantine published the Edict of Milan, granting religious freedom to Christians. Pretty important. We often hear about religious freedom. But back in 313, that's when Christians were first given religious freedom. Constantine himself donated the Palace of the Lateran, a portion of his wife's dowry, to the church for its first basilica. St. John Lateran Basilica is the first church in the world. The Lateran is the cathedral of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and as such it ranks as the mother and head of all the churches in the city and in the world. And from its dedication on this date in 324 until the 15th century, the Lateran was the residence of the popes. So we celebrate the first basilica, the first church. And it reminds us to celebrate this church and to celebrate every church throughout the world. We all know we can worship God anywhere. That's true. People will often say that. I don't need to come to church. I can worship God anywhere. It's true. I can worship God anywhere. But this is where God dwells. This is his house. That's why we're gathered here tonight, because this is his house. When I go to somebody's house and visit them, and they welcome me, it's different than going someplace else. Coming here should be different. And when we come into a Catholic church, we come in and there's a tabernacle. And the body of Jesus is present in that tabernacle. So when we come into this church, it should feel just a little different. So we celebrate the first basilica, the first church, Christian church in the world, but it reminds us to celebrate our church. I saw water flowing out from beneath the threshold of the temple. Maybe we can see that water as grace. The grace of God flowing out from the temple and into the world. And that's what we hope happens when we come to church. That the grace we receive here flows out from this church and goes with us into the world. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Just think how wonderful tonight would be if we allowed the grace from this church to flow with us to wherever we go this night. This water flows into the eastern district, down the Araba, and empties into the sea, the salt waters, which it makes fresh. Wherever the river flows, every sort of living creature that can multiply shall live. Fruit trees of every kind shall grow. They shall be watered by the flow from the sanctuary. We water the earth by how we live our lives. We water the earth by how we leave this church and how we choose to live. We behave a certain way in church because we're in God's house. You go to your grandmother's house, you probably behave a particular way because you're in your grandmother's house. But the key is when we leave this house, that we continue to share the graces that we have received. St. Paul said, you are God's building. Oh. So not only is this God's building, but this is God's building. Ooh. This is God's house. How I live affects this. If this is God's house, then what I look at, what I speak, where I go, everything makes a difference. It's much easier to not think of this as God's house. Then I could do whatever I want. My friends, this is God's house. This is God's house. And the grace we receive here fills this house so that when we leave this place, we can live a certain way. But each one must be careful how he builds upon this foundation. Do you know that you are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwells in you? And the Spirit of God, the temple of God, which you are, is holy. And then we hear the gospel. The familiar gospel of Jesus driving out the money changers, getting angry, getting upset. We always wonder, wasn't that a sin? He got angry. Getting angry isn't a sin. It's how we deal with it. It's what we do with our anger. That's the key. You do something to me and I get angry. Okay. Well, how do I deal with that anger? And Jesus was trying to get them to change. Tear this down and I can rebuild it in 3 days. But he was talking about the temple of his body. He showed us that this is a temple. So we celebrate this feast of the Lateran Basilica because it was the first basilica in the world. It reminds us to celebrate this church right here. But we are also reminded that this is the temple of God. When we leave here tonight, may we take with us the grace that we receive. When we leave here tonight, may God give us the grace and the courage to remember that this is the temple of God. And how I choose to live, and how I choose to speak, and how I choose to act does make a difference. We stand now as we profess our faith. I believe